Welcome to the Unit 1 review and Unit 2 overview. So, last week we saw two adaptations of the same original fairy tale. We did this so we could get the concept of adaptation, like how it works, what modes and strategies it utilizes, how people misconceive of adaptation, the myths, and what is really true about adaptation. So, the two main points that I want you to understand from Unit 1 are what textual analysis is and how to do it. That's one of the main things. Textual analysis is figuring out what message the text sends, right? And how it's sending that message. So that's one of the main things from Unit 1 I want you to get. And then the second big thing from Unit 1 is every adaptation changes the message of the original. It has to. It's impossible for it not to do that. So part of the reason that there is a myth of fidelity, right, is that it's impossible to adapt something without changing the message in some way. That's why it's false to believe that adaptations should be judged by the original, which is what the myth of fidelity is, right? Like it's not like the original, so therefore it's bad. Well, it may or may not be bad, but it's never going to be just like the original because it's changing media from one medium to another. So it's impossible to adapt something without changing the message in some way. So then for us to judge the adaptation by a standard that is physically impossible to meet because of the nature of adaptation, that's a little bit naive and maybe a little unfair, right? So that's why it's a myth. Okay. So the first unit tested you on your ability to create an argument and support it with textual evidence. And by you having to come up with a different argument for each text in Unit 1, which is what I asked you to do, you were also engaging in a practical application of this truth, the fact that every adaptation changes the original message. Okay, so that's Unit 1. That's really the most important thing to get from Unit 1. In Unit 2, we are looking at the history in particular of Western children's literature. So, in Unit 2, we're exploring one of the most influential examples of what's known as Golden Age literature. We're going to explore what I would argue is the most influential Golden Age text in U.S. history, so in the U.S. tradition, which is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And its extraordinarily influential 20th century adaptation, MGM's The Wizard of Oz. So when I say influential, I'm talking about literature in the Anglo-American tradition, so literature written in English. There are lots of traditions of children's literature throughout the globe, but this course is really most interested in U.S. children's literature and film, in part because the US is where Disney was created, which is currently, inarguably, the most prolific, influential, and ubiquitous purveyor of children's media in the world today. So I'm interested in looking at texts that inform that history in particular. Disney was also obsessed with Britain, so a lot of the Disney films are very British influenced, like specifically through his mind, as well as culturally. And also, I'm a British literature specialist, so I want to take advantage of my training as well. So, the golden age of children's literature, as the 19th century explosion of children's literature in England has been called, arises as a result of a new development in Europe of how childhood was perceived. In Europe, in the West, in any culture really, you can't have a children's literature until you start thinking of children as different than adults, like categorically different than adults. Otherwise, it's just literature and everybody can enjoy it. And that's what fairy tales were, right? They were literature for everybody. They weren't specifically designed for children, even though children's lit often goes back to fairy tales and adapts and utilizes fairy tales, as we saw in Unit 1. So you'll learn about the history of European or Western children's literature in Lesson 4, and then you'll learn about the Golden Age specifically in Lesson 5. Last unit, as I mentioned, we focused on textual analysis and the context of adaptation theory. This unit, we're adding in one more layer of context to think about, which is literary conventions. So a literary genre is a type of literature. There are many genres and subgenres, from epic poetry to like steampunk romance. Children's literature itself is a genre, as is children's film, but there are also subgenres within children's literature and children's film as well. So types or genres of literature, as we like to call them, often tend to do some of the same things over and over again. For example, in a romantic comedy film, or often in a book too, often in a romance book, there's usually some kind of meet cute where the couple meets in some kind of cute or interesting or strange or funny way. Then obstacles arise that prevent that couple from being together, different kinds of obstacles. But by the end of the film or the book, the couple gets married. And those are some conventions of the romance genre. So these things happen that over and over and over again, they are called conventions. Conventions are just a set of expectations we have as readers or watchers when we come to a certain genre about what's going to happen, how characters are going to develop, and what type of narrative moves we can expect to see. Um, yeah, so like if you're going to an action adventure film, you know you're going to see explosions and big muscly men punching each other and stuff like that. Whereas, like I mentioned, if you go to romantic comedy, you're going to expect something else. And if you go to like a horror film, then you're going to expect certain conventions as well. And Scream is a horror movie that plays on those conventions. It like talks about the conventions, it does meta conventions. Anyway, so in lesson 5, we're going to discuss some conventions then that we're used to seeing in Golden Age literature. Those conventions have the effect of helping to produce the text's messages. Even though texts share conventions sometimes, every text uses conventions in its own way, which means every text still has its own unique message. So in the Unit 2, you'll still be doing literary analysis and applying the adaptation theory that we've learned, but you'll also be discussing some of the literary and cinematic conventions and applying those to your analysis as well. Okay, contact me with any questions, have fun, and good luck with the unit.